Food production is once again moving to the center of Nigeria's economic conversation as the Bank of Agriculture put forward a large-scale 1.2 million-acre mechanized farming plan. The proposal signals a shift away from fragmented sustenance farming towards structured industrial-scale agriculture, aimed at improving output, efficiency, and food supply stability. I'm Olaitan Adebayo, and this is MarketSquare, your go-to show for deep insights into business and economic trends. Today, we're breaking down key developments shaping the global economic landscape. Stay with us. Welcome back to MarketSquare. A new farming plan is being put on the table that could change how food is produced across the country. The Bank of Agriculture is proposing to work directly with members of the House of Representatives to deploy tractors, irrigation systems, and shared farming hubs across all federal 360 constituencies. The idea is to cover about 1.2 million acres of farmland every year, not through individual farmers buying equipment, but through a system where machines and services are shared at the community level. This is not just about giving farmers loans or distributing inputs. It's about changing how farming is organized, moving from small manual plots to a coordinated system where land, machines, financing, and support service are brought together in one place. On the policy side, lawmakers are not just observers here. They are part of the financing model. Each representative is expected to contribute about 60% of the cost of a tractor in their constituency. That creates a decentralized rollout where implementation depends heavily on political will at the local level. It also introduces a governance layer that needs to be clearly defined. Who controls access to these tractors? Who manages the hubs? How are farmers selected or prioritized? Without clear rules, what is meant to be a shared system could easily become uneven across constituencies. In terms of alignment, this fits into the broader push to improve food production and reduce reliance on imports. There is already a 250 billion naira facility approved to support farmers alongside insurance and financing reforms. What this plan is trying to do is to connect those policies to actual production on the ground by combining finance with physical tools and infrastructure. The agricultural impact depends on how this operates. Mechanization here means tractors for land preparation, irrigation for year-round farming, and aggregation centers where produce is collected and stored. If irrigation works as planned, farmers can move from one harvest cycle to 2 or even 3 cycles a year. That is where the real shift happens. Higher output per acre, more consistent production, and less dependence on seasonal rainfall. Nigeria's current average cereal yield is about 1.5 tons per acre. If mechanization and irrigation raise this to 2.5 tons, then across 1.2 million acres, output could increase by 1.2 million tons annually, a significant step towards food security. The target of more than 2 tons per acre shows the intention to move away from subsistence farming to something more commercial. While specific crops are not mentioned, the structure points towards stable crops like rice, maize, and grains, where mechanization and storage make the biggest difference. Funding is coming from multiple angles. Lawmakers contribute to equipment. The Bank of Agriculture provides coordination and financing. And their existing partnership like the $1 billion fund with African Export-Import Bank, supporting the broader value chain. That mix of public and institutional funding suggests the plan is trying to spread risks rather than rely on a single source. On jobs, the impact is layered. There is direct farm labor, but also new roles in machine operation, maintenance, logistics, storage, and input supply. Mechanization reduces some forms of manual labor, but creates other types of work that requires different skills. If each hub generates 50 to 100 direct jobs, then across 360 constituencies, the plan could create 18,000 to 36,000 jobs, not counting indirect farm labor. That transition will depend on how well training is handled. This is where the social side becomes important. Smallholder farmers are still the backbone of food production. This plan does not replace them, but it changes how they operate. Instead of working in isolation, they become part of a shared system. If access is fair, it can raise productivity and income. If access is controlled or limited, it could exclude the same farmers it is meant to support. Land is another sensitive part of the structure. Lawmakers are expected to provide fenced land for these hubs. That raises questions about ownership, community involvement, and whether land is being allocated transparently. Without clarity, this could create tension at the local level. Training and extension services are included, which is critical. Machinery without knowledge does not improve output. Farmers need to understand how to use equipment, apply inputs, and manage crops efficiently. That is what turns access into actual productivity. Environmental impact is less clearly defined in the proposal. Large-scale mechanization can improve efficiency, but also increases pressure on soil and water resources. Irrigation expands output but requires careful water management. Without sustainability measures, the long-term effects could become a problem. Integrating climate-smart practices such as precision irrigation and conservation tillage would help mitigate these risks. Looking at similar efforts elsewhere, shared mechanization systems have worked in countries where maintenance access and governance are consistent. Ethiopia's mechanization centers and Kenya's tractor leasing cooperatives shows that success depends on transparency and upkeep. India's custom hiring centers boosted yields significantly, but only where farmer training was strong. Nigeria has tried versions of this before, but many struggled because machines broke down, systems were not maintained, or access was uneven. There is also a link to infrastructure. Increased production only translates to income if farmers can move goods to market. Roads, storage, and distribution networks become just as important as the tractors themselves. What this proposal is trying to do is to connect all these pieces together: machines, land, finance, and services into one system. If those pieces work together, it will improve food supply, reduce import, and stabilize prices over time. If they don't, it will decrease. If they don't, it risks becoming another well-designed plan that struggles once implementation begins. Everything comes down to how evenly and consistently it is executed across those 360 constituencies. That is where the real story will be decided. From long-term effort to strengthen food supply, attention now moves to the energy sector, where efforts to restore domestic refining capacity are back on the agenda. Nigeria has been here before, and that is what makes this latest move harder to take at face level. For years, the conversation around refineries has followed the same pattern. An announcement is made, expectation rise, money is committed, and then things quietly stall. So when a new agreement is signed, the real question is not what is being promised, but what will actually be different this time. The latest development, a memorandum of understanding between the Nigerian National Petroleum Company and Chinese firms, is being positioned as a reset, especially for the Warri and Port Harcourt refineries. These are not small assets. They were built to reduce dependence on imported fuel, yet for years they have contributed almost nothing to daily supply. Instead, Nigeria has relied heavily on imports, which means spending dollars, putting prices on foreign reserves, and exposing fuel prices to global shocks. Bringing in Chinese partners introduces a different dynamics. China has financed and built large-scale infrastructure across Africa, often stepping into spaces where Western investors are cautious. That usually comes with speed and execution strength, but it also comes with its own trade-offs. Financing terms are not always fully transparent, and repayment structures can tie countries into long-term obligations. So while this partnership could unlock technical expertise and funding, it also raises a deeper question about how much control Nigeria retains over its own energy assets in the long run. From an economic standpoint, the logic behind reviving these refineries is straightforward. When a country produces crude oil but imports refined fuel, it is essentially exporting value and importing cost. Restarting local refining could reduce that gap. Less fuel import means less demand for foreign exchange. That in turn could ease some pressure on the naira. It will also reduce the volatility that comes with global fuel prices, feeding directly into local inflation. But the story doesn't just stop at refining. What is being proposed goes beyond simply fixing old plants. There is talk of building oil out petrochemical and gas-based industrial clusters around these refineries. That changes the conversation from just fuel production to industrial development. Petrochemicals feed into plastics, fertilizers, and manufacturing inputs. If those pieces come together, it could create a chain reaction: more local production, more jobs, and less reliance on import for industrial materials. Still, this is where execution becomes everything. These kinds of integrated projects require stable power, transport networks, pipelines, and consistent policy direction. Without those, even a well-funded refinery can struggle to operate efficiently. Nigeria's track record in this area is mixed, and that is putting it mildly. Then there is the over-governance side, which has quietly shaped the outcome of past projects. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company has gone through reforms and now operates as a commercial entity, at least on paper. It has even reported profit recently, but questions remain around transparency, contract times, and accountability. For this deal to avoid fate of previous efforts, there has to be clarity: how much is being invested, who owns what, and what milestone must be met, and what happens if those targets are missed. Another layer to this is financial sustainability. Refinery rehabilitation is expensive. Even with reported profits, funding large-scale projects while maintaining operations is not straightforward. If the financing leans heavily on external partners, repayment terms will matter. If it leans on internal funds, then profitability needs to be real and consistent, not just reflected in accounting figures. What makes this moment different, or at least potentially different, is timing. The pressure to fix domestic refining has increased. Fuel subsidy reforms have changed how prices behave. Foreign exchange pressures are more visible, and there's a growing push to build more value locally instead of exporting raw resources. But none of that guarantees success. The gap between agreement and execution is where most of these projects fall apart. So while this deal opens the door to something more stable and self-sufficient in the energy space, it also carries the weight of past failures. That's really where this sits, not as a breakthrough yet, but as another attempt to solve a problem that has lingered for decades. Whether it turns into working refineries, lower import bills, and stronger industrial activity, or just another announcement that fades over time, will depend less on signing of the deal and more on what happens after the headlines. Our energy infrastructure is being revived. Reforms are also underway in the power sector around how consumer complaints are managed. Nigeria has entered a new regulatory phase with responsibility for handling consumer compliance on billing, metering, and service quality shifting from the federal level to state regulators. It is a structural change driven by the Electricity Act 2023, which effectively breaks the long-standing centralized model and binds more control to subnational authorities. At face value, the logic is practical. For years, more persistent complaints in the sector have revolved around estimated billing, delayed meter installation, and weak consumer service from distribution companies. A single federal regulator struggled to manage these issues across a diverse and complex market. By moving oversight closer to the state, the expectation is faster response times, better monitoring, and decisions that reflect local realities rather than a one-size-fits-all approach from Abuja. But execution is where the real test lies. Capacity across states is not equal. Some states already have stronger institutional frameworks, clear regulatory processes, and better funding. Others are still building from scratch. That gap introduces a new kind of imbalance into the system. Consumer protection will now depend on where you live, not just on national rules. In practical terms, a billing dispute in one state could be resolved quickly and transparently, while same issue elsewhere drags on without resolution. There is also a governance risk that cannot be ignored. Moving regulation closer to the states increases proximity, but it also increases exposure. State regulators may face pressure from local political actors or from same distribution companies they are meant to oversee. Without strong safeguards, independence becomes fragile. And once regulatory decisions are influenced by local interests rather than clear rules, confidence in the system begins to erode. The financial implications are just as critical. Nigeria's electricity market has long struggled with liquidity problems, and billing disputes sit at the center of that challenge. When consumers do not trust their bills, they resist payment. When revenues fall, distribution companies cannot meet their obligations across the value chain. That cycle has been one of the biggest constraints on investment in the sector. If state regulators can improve dispute resolution and restore trust, it could strengthen revenue collection and create room for infrastructure upgrades. If not, the same financial stress simply shifts from the federal level to the states. Another layer to this is coordination. Even with decentralization, the electricity market remains interconnected. Power generation and transmission are still largely managed at the national level, while distribution is becoming more localized. That creates overlap. Without clear boundaries and strong coordination between federal and state regulators, the system risks fragmentation. Investors and operators need clarity on who set the rules, who enforces them, and how conflicts are resolved. Any ambiguity raises risks and slows down investment decision. The reform reflects a broader shift in Nigerian approach to power sector, moving away from central control towards a more distributed model. The success of that shift will depend less on policy itself and more on how effectively states build capacity, maintain regulatory independence, and coordinate with the federal system. The impact will be immediate and practical for consumers. The real measure of this change will not be in policy documents, but in whether complaints are resolved faster, bills become more transparent, and service improves. If those outcomes do not follow, decentralization risks becoming a structural change without a meaningful difference on the ground. Across agriculture, energy, and electricity regulation, the direction is less about isolated reforms and more about system restructuring. Agriculture is being scaled into industrial production, refining capacity is being revived to reduce the import dependence, and power sector compliance are being pushed closer to state-level governance. Together, they reflect an economy trying to rebuild efficiency across production, supply, and service delivery, where each sector is being adjusted to close long-standing structural gaps. That wraps up today's episode of MarketSquare. Adebayo. Do well to follow us across all our social media platforms. Thank you for watching.